know that moment when someone you care about just goes quiet on you. The room feels heavy, the air gets thick, and suddenly you're left replaying every word you said, wondering what you did wrong. Silent treatment doesn't just steal words, it steals connection. It makes you doubt yourself, it makes you feel small, and it leaves you carrying the weight of a conversation that never happened. And the hardest part, you can't fix what you can't talk about. That's why learning how to shut it down with strength, not anger, and with clarity, not confusion, matters so much, because your voice deserves to be heard, and so does your heart. Silent treatment has a way of making even the strongest person feel powerless. It's not just the absence of words, it's the absence of connection, of safety, of knowing where you stand with someone you care about. And when it happens, it can leave you second guessing yourself, carrying the weight of blame that doesn't fully belong to you. I want to take that heaviness off your shoulders for a moment and give you something solid to hold on to. Because there are clear, healthy ways to face the silence without losing yourself in it. And once you know them, you don't just get your voice back, you get your peace back too. Silent treatment is one of those experiences that leaves a mark even if no words are ever spoken. It's the quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. It's the kind of silence that wraps around you like a cold blanket, leaving you unsure of what's happening or how to respond. For some people, it feels like punishment. For others, it feels like rejection. And for many, it's both. The truth is, silent treatment is more than just someone choosing not to talk. It's an emotional shutdown that carries weight, a weight that often lands hardest on the person left waiting, guessing, and carrying the tension in their chest. When we experience silent treatment, our minds immediately start searching for answers. Did I do something wrong? Did I say the wrong thing? Am I not enough? These questions spin in our heads because silence doesn't give us direction. Silence leaves room for assumption. And assumptions, when left unchecked, almost always land in the most painful places. It's human nature to want closure, to want clarity, to want to repair what feels broken. But when the other person chooses not to engage, it traps us in a kind of emotional limbo. We're there, ready to talk, ready to work through it. But the door is closed, and that's a lonely place to stand. Silent treatment also hits differently depending on the relationship. In a marriage, it can feel like the walls of your own home have turned against you. In a friendship, it can feel like betrayal. In family, it can feel like abandonment. No matter the context, what's at stake is the same connection. Connection is oxygen for relationships. And when silent treatment shows up, it cuts off the air supply. That's why it feels so suffocating. But here's the part we often miss. Silent treatment isn't always about us. Sometimes it's the other person's way of protecting themselves from conflict. Sometimes it's their coping mechanism when they feel overwhelmed or don't know how to express their feelings. It doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it healthy, but it does make it human. People don't shut down for no reason. They shut down because something inside them feels unsafe or out of control. Recognizing this doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps us step back from carrying unnecessary blame. It gives us perspective. That said, recognizing the other person's reasons doesn't make the experience any less painful for you. Being on the receiving end of silent treatment leaves you feeling small, unworthy, invisible. And no one should have to live in that. What matters is not whether silence happens, it's what we choose to do with it. That's where the freedom comes in. Breaking free from the weight of silent treatment starts with shifting the focus back to what you can control. You can't make someone talk. You can't force connection. And the harder you push for it, the deeper the other person may retreat. But what you can do is anchor yourself. You can protect your own peace, your own clarity, and your own sense of worth, even when the other person withholds theirs. That's not easy because silence pulls on every insecurity we have. It tells us stories about not being good enough, not being lovable, not being valued. And those stories feel convincing in the quiet. But breaking free means refusing to let someone else's shutdown define your identity. One practical step is to name the silence for what it is. Not in anger, not in accusation, but in calm truth. Something like, I feel the distance between us, and I want us to talk when you're ready. That's not about chasing them down. It's about standing in your own integrity and refusing to play into the guessing game. Silence loses power when it's brought into the light. By calmly naming it, you're choosing to face it without fueling it. Another step is giving space without surrendering connection. That sounds contradictory, but here's what it means. You allow the other person the room they seem to need, but you don't punish yourself in the process. You don't spend days twisting in knots, replaying every word. Instead, you redirect your energy into what grounds you, whether that's journaling, calling a trusted friend, going for a walk, or focusing on responsibilities that matter. When you do this, you're reminding yourself that your life is bigger than someone else's silence. You're not ignoring the issue, you're refusing to drown in it. There's also the question of boundaries. Silent treatment becomes especially destructive when it turns into a pattern, when it's not just a moment of overwhelm, but a strategy for control. If someone in your life regularly uses silence to manipulate, punish, or avoid responsibility, you have to decide what's acceptable for you. Boundaries don't have to be harsh. They can be as simple as, I'm here to talk when you're ready, but I won't sit in silence for days. That's not healthy for me. Boundaries aren't about changing the other person. They're about honoring yourself enough to stop tolerating what diminishes you. What I've seen time and time again is that when someone learns to step out from under the weight of silent treatment, they rediscover something important, their voice, and not just their voice in the sense of words spoken, but their voice in the sense of identity. The steady belief that I matter, I deserve respect, I will not shrink. Silent treatment feeds on silence. But when you show up with calm, clear words and consistent boundaries, you take that power back. Breaking free also means shifting the story in your head. Silence often whispers lies like, if I were better, they wouldn't treat me this way. But the truth is, the silent treatment says more about the person giving it than the one receiving it. It reflects their struggles, their patterns, their lack of healthy tools. When you start to see it that way, you loosen its grip on your heart. You stop carrying someone else's weight as if it's your own. And here's the bigger picture. No relationship can thrive on silence. Healthy relationships aren't built on perfect communication. They're built on willingness. Willingness to talk, to listen, to repair, to try again. If you're in a relationship where silent treatment shows up, you can be the one who sets a new tone. Not by forcing, not by begging, but by living out clarity, courage, and compassion. Sometimes that shift invites the other person to do the same. Sometimes it doesn't. But either way, you've broken free from the weight because you've stopped letting silence decide your story. At the end of the day, silent treatment doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to steal your peace or your sense of worth. You can acknowledge the pain, see it for what it is, and still choose a different way forward. And when you do, you'll find that the quiet no longer crushes you. It becomes the backdrop where your voice grows stronger, steadier, and unshakable. When communication shuts down, it doesn't just leave a pause in the conversation. It leaves a crack in the relationship. It's that moment when words stop flowing, when one person withdraws and the other is left standing in the silence, unsure of how to bridge the gap. And what makes it so painful is not just the lack of words, but the lack of understanding. You can feel the distance growing, even if you're sitting right next to each other. You can feel the connection thinning, even though nothing big was said. The shutdown itself becomes the message, and the message is often received as rejection, abandonment, or indifference. That's why it hurts so deeply. For most people, the first instinct when communication shuts down is to push harder. We raise our voices, repeat ourselves, chase after the other person's attention. Not because we want to fight, but because we're desperate to be heard. We want to break through the wall of silence and make them see what we're feeling. But the harder we push, the more they retreat. It's like quicksand. The more energy you throw into the struggle, the deeper you sink. And before long, both people are stuck. One person is protecting themselves through silence, and the other is exhausting themselves trying to force a breakthrough. What we often don't see in those moments is that communication shut down rarely happens because someone doesn't care. More often, it happens because they don't know how to process what they're feeling, or they don't feel safe enough to express it. For some, it's fear of conflict. For others, it's shame or overwhelm. And sometimes it's not about the other person at all. It's about the weight of stress, disappointment, or unspoken wounds they're carrying. When we only see the shutdown as an attack on us, we miss the opportunity to understand what's underneath it. And that's where rebuilding connection begins, not in demanding words, but in learning to listen beneath the silence. The challenge, of course, is that silence doesn't feel neutral. It feels like punishment. It feels like being shut out of the place you most want to belong. And when your nervous system is wired for connection, when love, trust, and closeness are what you crave, that wall of silence feels unbearable. That's why so many of us react with anger, frustration, or desperate attempts to fix it. But here's the shift: connection isn't rebuilt by forcing a door open. It's rebuilt by making the space safe enough for the other person to walk through it on their own. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through presence. Not presence that's demanding or anxious, but presence that's steady and calm. Think of it this way: if someone is shutting down, their body and mind are in defense mode. They've pulled back because something feels too threatening, too overwhelming. When you meet that shutdown with more pressure, it only confirms their fear. But when you meet it with calm, respectful presence, it signals safety. It tells them, I'm not here to fight you, I'm here to be with you. Sometimes that presence is as simple as sitting in the same room without pushing for words. Sometimes it's offering a short, grounding statement like, I can see you're not ready to talk, and that's okay. I'll be here when you are. That one sentence holds space without adding pressure. Rebuilding connection also means being willing to look at our own role in the breakdown. This isn't about blame, it's about ownership. Ask yourself, do I listen to respond, or do I listen to understand? Do I create space for the other person's feelings, or do I rush to defend myself? Do I make the conversation safe, or do I unknowingly add to the pressure that makes them shut down? These are hard questions, but they're also freeing ones. Because the moment we recognize what's in our control, we stop spinning in frustration and start building bridges. Another piece of this is learning to express your needs without accusation. It's easy to say, you never talk to me, or you're always shutting down. But language like that puts the other person in a corner, and corners only create more withdrawal. Instead, frame your needs in terms of your own experience. I feel disconnected when we don't talk, and what I need is some way to work through this together. That's not about pointing fingers, it's about opening a door. And the more doors you open, the more opportunities you create for connection to walk back in. Real connection is also rebuilt in the small moments, not just the big ones. When someone has shut down, the temptation is to wait for a dramatic breakthrough conversation. But often, connection is restored in subtle ways: making a cup of coffee for them without saying a word, sharing a memory that makes you both smile, offering a light touch on the shoulder that says, I still care, even in this silence. These gestures may not solve the deeper issue right away, but they soften the edges. They remind the other person that even in distance, there's still care. And sometimes that reminder is what opens the door back to conversation. Boundaries are important here too. Rebuilding connection doesn't mean tolerating endless silence or sacrificing your own needs. If communication shutdown becomes a repeated pattern, you have to be clear about what's acceptable for you. It can sound like, I understand you need space sometimes, but when that turns into days of silence, it damages our connection. I want us to find a healthier way. Boundaries don't push people away, they invite healthier closeness. They show the other person that you're committed to the relationship, but not at the cost of your own well-being. At the heart of all this is remembering why connection matters in the first place. We don't seek communication just to exchange words. We seek it because we want to feel seen, valued, and safe with the people we love. When communication shuts down, it threatens that core need. And when we work to rebuild it, what we're really saying is, I want us to find our way back to each other. That desire, when it's rooted in empathy, patience, and respect, can be powerful enough to break through even the hardest silence. Rebuilding connection when communication shuts down isn't about quick fixes or perfect words. It's about steady presence, honest ownership, clear boundaries, and small gestures of care that open the door again. It's about holding on to your own sense of worth even when the other person withdraws. And it's about remembering that connection once lost can be rebuilt, not through force, but through love lived out in calm, consistent ways. Because at the end of the day, communication isn't just about talking, it's about trust. It's about creating a space where both people feel safe enough to bring their whole selves, words, silence, fears, and all. And when you choose to show up with that kind of steady strength, you don't just rebuild connection. You set the foundation for a relationship that can weather silence without being broken by it. Silence in a relationship can feel louder than any words ever spoken. It's the kind of quiet that presses on your chest, that leaves you lying awake at night wondering what's wrong, wondering if you're the only one who feels the distance. And in that silence, something dangerous happens. You start losing your own voice. Not just the words you want to say, but the confidence to say them. You begin second, guessing every thought, holding back emotions that need to be heard, shrinking yourself to avoid making the silence worse. Over time, that quiet doesn't just sit between you and the other person. It seeps inside you, convincing you that your voice doesn't matter. Finding your voice in the middle of that silence isn't about shouting louder or demanding to be heard. It's about reclaiming the truth that your perspective, your feelings, and your needs are valid, even when the other person isn't giving space for them. Too often, silence trains us into patterns of self-erasure. We tell ourselves maybe it's not worth bringing up. Maybe I should just let it go. Maybe keeping the peace is better than starting something. And while those thoughts may feel like survival in the moment, they slowly chip away at your sense of self. Because every time you silence yourself to avoid someone else's silence, you lose a little more of who you are. The real issue here is not just the silence itself, but what the silence makes us believe. Silence makes us believe that speaking up is unsafe. That conflict means disconnection. That our needs will only push people further away, and so we stay quiet. But here's the truth: silence doesn't protect connection. It starves it. And finding your voice is the first step in feeding it again. Now, finding your voice doesn't mean blurting out everything you feel the moment it comes to mind. It means learning to ground yourself enough to speak from a place of clarity rather than desperation. When someone you love shuts down, your body often reacts with urgency. Your heart races, your thoughts spiral, you feel the pull to fix it immediately. If you speak from that place, your words come out sharp or frantic, and that only deepens the shutdown. But if you can pause, breathe, and anchor yourself in the truth that your feelings are valid, your words carry a different weight. They become steady, not shaky. They become about connection, not control. For example, instead of snapping, "You never talk to me," you might say, "I feel really alone when there's so much silence between us. I want us to find a way to work through this together." That shift isn't about being perfect with your wording. It's about staying rooted in your own truth while still leaving room for theirs. It's about claiming your voice without trying to drown out theirs. Part of finding your voice is also separating your identity from the other person's response. One of the hardest things about silence is that it makes us believe our worth is tied to whether or not the other person engages. If they speak, we feel valued. If they stay quiet, we feel invisible. But your worth does not rise and fall with someone else's ability to communicate. Your feelings matter whether or not they're immediately received. Your needs are valid whether or not they're immediately met. Speaking them out loud, even gently, even briefly, is how you remind yourself of that. And so many people fall into the trap of waiting for the right moment to find their voice. They wait for the silence to break first, for the mood to shift, for the other person to give them permission to speak. But waiting for the perfect moment often turns into never speaking at all. Finding your voice is less about timing and more about intention. It's about deciding that your truth deserves air, even if the other person isn't ready to respond in the way you hope. You can speak without demanding. You can share without forcing. You can honor your voice without silencing theirs. And here's something important: finding your voice doesn't always look like words. Sometimes it looks like choosing to step away from a cycle that keeps you small. Sometimes it looks like writing a letter you may or may not send just to put your truth on paper. Sometimes it looks like saying, "I'm here when you're ready to talk, but I won't carry this silence alone." These are not acts of aggression. They are acts of self-respect. They are ways of saying, "I will not disappear just because you've gone quiet." What makes this difficult is the fear underneath. Fear of conflict. fear of rejection, fear that speaking up will only make things worse. And it's true, sometimes finding your voice does make things uncomfortable in the short term. But the alternative is a long-term erosion of self. The alternative is living in a relationship where your needs never surface, where your feelings never land, where your presence is muted. That's not peace, that's surrender. And over time, surrender turns into resentment, and resentment is far more destructive than a moment of discomfort. Finding your voice also means practicing compassion, both for yourself and for the other person. Compassion for yourself looks like recognizing how hard it is to speak when silence has weighed on you for so long. Compassion for them looks like remembering that their silence is often a shield, not a weapon. They may not know how to express what they feel. They may be caught in their own cycles of fear or shame. Seeing that doesn't mean excusing the silence, but it does mean you can approach it with less hostility and more humanity. And when you do, your voice carries less blame and more invitation. One of the most powerful truths you can hold on to is this: your voice is not just about being heard, it's about being whole. Every time you speak with honesty, you piece yourself back together. Every time you express a need with calm courage, you remind yourself that you matter. And when you build that practice, silence stops feeling like a prison. It becomes just a moment, one you can navigate without losing yourself in it. The people who learn to find their voice in the middle of silence don't always get the response they want right away. But they do something even more important. They refuse to abandon themselves. They choose clarity over confusion, courage over fear, and honesty over quiet resentment. And those choices, repeated over time, don't just change relationships, they change the person making them. They turn silence from something that controls you into something that reveals your strength. At the end of the day, finding your voice is not about fixing someone else. It's about refusing to go missing in your own life. It's about choosing to speak from a place of dignity, even when the other person has gone quiet. It's about remembering that silence does not get to erase your truth. Your voice still matters. Your needs still matter. And the more you choose to live from that truth, the free you become. Not just in your relationships, but in yourself. Silent distance in a relationship can feel like standing on opposite sides of a canyon, close enough to see the other person, but too far to reach them. It's not just the absence of words, it's the absence of warmth, of presence, of the small signals that remind us we're seen and cared for. When that distance sets in, you start to notice it in the little things, the conversations that shrink down to logistics, the looks that don't linger, the way laughter feels rare. And underneath all of that is a question you don't want to ask out loud, but can't stop thinking: are we drifting apart? What makes silent distance so painful is that it doesn't usually come out of nowhere. It often creeps in slowly. Maybe it starts after an argument that didn't get resolved. Maybe it builds from weeks of stress, of not having time to really check in. Or maybe it's just the weight of unspoken feelings that both of you keep setting aside, hoping they'll fade on their own. But silence doesn't erase what's unspoken, it deepens it. And the longer the distance lasts, the harder it feels to bridge it. You want to reach out, but you don't know how. You don't want to make it worse, but doing nothing feels unbearable too. The heart of this struggle is that distance in relationships isn't just about communication, it's about connection. When the other person pulls away, it doesn't just leave you without words, it leaves you without closeness. And closeness is what makes relationships feel alive. That's why silence feels heavy. It's not just quiet, it's the quiet of someone you want to be near, but can't. And when you don't have the closeness, you start to wonder if you've lost the care, the love, the safety that once felt so natural. Turning that silent distance into an honest dialogue requires something counterintuitive. It requires you to slow down, to resist the urge to break through the quiet with force. Because the temptation is strong when you're hurting, you want answers. You want to fix it now. But pushing into silence with urgency often builds a bigger wall. What shifts the moment isn't pressure, it's invitation. An honest dialogue is never about cornering the other person. It's about opening a door wide enough that they feel safe enough to walk through it. That begins with how you name the distance. When silence lingers, we often default to blame. You're ignoring me. You never talk. You don't care anymore. And And while those words may capture your frustration, they rarely create space for dialogue. What they create is defensiveness. The other person hears an accusation and retreats even further. A healthier approach sounds more like, I feel the space between us, and I miss the closeness we used to share. I'd like to understand what's going on for you. That language shifts the focus. It doesn't deny your hurt, but it frames it as an invitation to reconnect instead of a demand to defend. Another key to turning distance into dialogue is learning to tolerate the discomfort of vulnerability. Silence, for all its pain, can sometimes feel safer than speaking up, because silence doesn't risk rejection. Silence doesn't risk saying the wrong thing. Silence keeps you from exposing the parts of yourself that feel fragile. But honest dialogue requires exactly that, stepping into the risk of being known. Saying, I feel lonely in this silence, or I want to understand you, but I don't know how to reach you right now, takes courage. It feels raw. And yet it's those raw words that often create the first cracks in the wall of distance. It's also important to recognize that honest dialogue isn't just about speaking your truth. It's about being ready to receive theirs. Sometimes the reason the other person pulls away is because they don't believe their feelings will be heard without judgment. Maybe they've tried before and felt dismissed. Maybe they're carrying emotions they're ashamed of. If you want to rebuild dialogue, you have to create a space where their honesty, however messy, won't be punished. That doesn't mean you accept hurtful behavior or abandon your own needs. It means you choose to listen with the intention to understand, not just to respond. Here's a real dynamic many couples face. One person shuts down because they feel overwhelmed, and the other person chases harder because they feel abandoned. The more one pursues, the more the other retreats. The more one retreats, the harder the other pursues. It's a painful cycle, and both people end up exhausted. The only way to break it is for one person to step out of the pattern. If you're the one longing for connection, that might mean shifting from chasing to inviting. Instead of, why won't you just talk to me? You try, I want to understand what you're feeling, and I'm here when you're ready. That shift removes the chase. It replaces pressure with presence. And often, presence is what slowly draws the other person back in. Turning distance into dialogue also requires patience. Silence doesn't dissolve in one conversation. Sometimes the first attempt feels clumsy. Sometimes the other person stays quiet longer than you hoped. But dialogue is built over time through consistency. It's built when you keep showing up with calm, steady efforts instead of giving in to frustration or giving up altogether. You don't have to force a breakthrough in one sitting. You just have to keep creating openings, small and steady, until the other person begins to trust that it's safe to step back into closeness. And let's be honest, sometimes the distance doesn't close the way we want. Sometimes the other person chooses to stay guarded, to stay silent. In those moments, finding honest dialogue might mean first having it with yourself, naming your own needs, acknowledging your own pain, and deciding what boundaries are necessary for your well-being. Saying, I want closeness, but I can't carry the weight of this silence alone, is a way of respecting your own voice, even when the other person isn't ready to respond. Because turning distance into dialogue doesn't just happen between people, it also happens within us when we stop silencing our own truth. The beauty of honest dialogue is that it doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require the right script, the perfect timing, or even instant resolution. It requires courage, patience, and compassion. Courage to speak what feels vulnerable. Patience to let the process unfold slowly. Compassion to see the silence not only as rejection, but sometimes as a sign of someone else's struggle. When those three come together, distance begins to shrink. The canyon that felt too wide starts to narrow. The quiet begins to soften into words, and those words, however imperfect, start to build connection again. At the end of the day, silent distance doesn't have to be the end of closeness. It can be the starting point of deeper honesty if you're willing to step into the discomfort with calm strength. By naming the distance, inviting dialogue without force, holding space for the other person's truth, and protecting your own voice, you create a path forward. A path that doesn't just break the silence, but transforms it into something meaningful. Because what we all want underneath the noise and the quiet is the same: to know and to be known. Honest dialogue is how we get there, one brave word at a time. Emotional shutdown is one of the most frustrating and painful places a relationship can land in. It's not loud, it's not explosive, and that's what makes it so hard to deal with. Instead of raised voices or heated arguments, everything just stops. The words stop. The eye contact stops. The connection that once felt alive suddenly feels frozen. And in that stillness, you're left carrying all the questions. Did I do something wrong? Why won't they talk? Do they even care anymore? The silence of emotional shutdown can be louder than any argument because it leaves you with no way forward, no map to understand what's happening. The truth is, emotional shutdown doesn't only happen in marriages or romantic relationships. It happens between friends, between parents and kids, between coworkers. It happens anywhere closeness and communication matter. And when it shows up, it leaves one person waiting in the dark and the other locked behind a door they don't know how to open. For the person on the outside, it feels like abandonment. For the person on the inside, it feels like protection. And that's the hidden dynamic most of us miss. Emotional shutdown isn't always about punishment. It's often about survival. When someone shuts down emotionally, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to stay present without getting overwhelmed. It might be fear of conflict. It might be shame about how they're feeling. It might be exhaustion from carrying too much for too long. But whatever the reason, the shutdown is a defense mechanism. The problem is that defense doesn't just protect them, it also pushes you away. And that distance doesn't solve anything. It just adds more pain to both sides. Ending emotional shutdown with strength begins with seeing it for what it really is. If you only see it as rejection, you'll react with anger, fear, or desperation. And those reactions, while completely human, often make the shutdown worse. But if you can learn to see the shutdown as a signal of overwhelm, of fear, of a lack of tools, then you can respond with clarity instead of chaos. That's the strength piece. Strength isn't about forcing someone to open up. It's about staying grounded enough that you don't lose yourself in the silence. Think about what usually happens when someone shuts down. You feel the wall go up, and your instinct is to tear it down. You repeat yourself, you raise your voice, you push harder for answers. But from the other side, every push feels like pressure, and pressure is the very thing they're trying to escape. So they pull away even more, and suddenly you're both locked in a cycle neither of you wants. One person chasing, one person retreating, both people hurting. The key to breaking that cycle isn't to chase harder, it's to shift your posture from force to invitation. That doesn't mean you stay silent yourself. It means you use your voice in a way that lowers the temperature instead of raising it. Instead of, why won't you talk to me? It sounds like, I can see you're overwhelmed and I'm here to listen when you're ready. That kind of statement carries strength because it acknowledges the reality without escalating it. It's not begging, it's not blaming, it's steady. And steadiness is often the very thing that makes it safe for someone to come back out of shutdown. Strength also looks like setting boundaries around the shutdown without shaming the other person. Because here's the truth, while shutdown may be human, it's not healthy to let it linger unchecked. If the silence stretches for hours or days, it starts to erode trust. So part of ending shutdown with strength is being clear about what's okay and what's not. You might say, I understand you need space sometimes. I'm willing to give that. But I can't sit in silence for days. It hurts our relationship. We need to find a healthier way. That's not an attack. That's a boundary. And boundaries, when spoken calmly, are a way of protecting the relationship instead of letting it decay in silence. Another piece of this is tending to yourself in the middle of shutdown. When the person you care about goes quiet, it's easy to spiral into insecurity. You start doubting your worth, doubting your place in the relationship. But ending shutdown with strength means refusing to let someone else's silence erase your value. It means grounding yourself in the truth that my feelings are real, my voice matters, my needs are valid, even if the other person isn't engaging right now. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do in the face of shutdown is to stop internalizing it as your fault. At the same time, if you're the one who tends to shut down, strength for you looks different. Strength looks like naming what you're feeling before you disappear. It can be as simple as saying, I need a little time to process. I'm not shutting you out, I just need space to calm down. That one sentence can make all the difference. because the shutdown itself isn't what damages trust. It's the mystery around it. When the other person doesn't know what's happening, they fill in the blanks with their worst fears. By putting words to your need for space, you protect the connection while still protecting yourself. That's emotional maturity. That's strength. Ending shutdown with strength also means being willing to come back to the table. Silence can buy you time, but it can't repair what's broken. At some point, words have to return. The dialogue has to reopen. And when it does, coming back with honesty, not defensiveness, not avoidance, is what rebuilds trust. Saying, "I shut down earlier because I felt overwhelmed, but I want to talk now," is powerful. It shows humility. It shows willingness. And willingness is the foundation of every healthy relationship. There's one more key piece here: compassion. Strength in relationships is never about domination. It's about creating safety. When you approach shutdown with compassion, whether for yourself or for the other person, you take away the shame that keeps it alive. You remind each other that neither of you is the enemy. The silence is the enemy. The disconnection is the enemy. And together, with patience and courage, you can work against that instead of against each other. The keys to ending emotional shutdown with strength are not complicated, but they are hard. They require you to see the shutdown differently, to use your voice calmly, to set boundaries clearly, to care for yourself intentionally, and to return to dialogue with humility. None of those things happen perfectly, but every small step matters. Because every time you respond with steadiness instead of panic, every time you choose clarity instead of blame, every time you hold on to compassion instead of resentment, you weaken the grip of shutdown. At the end of the day, shutdown doesn't have to define your relationship. It doesn't have to be the place where closeness ends. It can be the place where you learn to stand strong, where you learn to use your voice in a new way, where you learn to see silence not as the end of connection, but as the moment you choose to build it differently. And when you practice that kind of strength, you're not just ending shutdown, you're creating a relationship where both people can be human, both people can be heard, and both people can find their way back to each other, even after the silence.